Breaking news, the Trump administration changing the rules for migrants hoping to claim asylum in the United States. Pete Williams, NBC's justice correspondent, Phil Levine, former Democratic mayor of Miami Beach, who ran for Florida governor last year, and Elliot Williams, assistant director with ICE and former deputy assistant attorney general with me, Maria Teresa Kumar and Noah Rothman back with me. Pete, what more can you tell us?
Well, this rule takes effect tomorrow once it's published in the Federal Register, and what it says is that it will bar from eligibility to seek asylum anyone crossing the southern border who came through another country and didn't seek asylum in that country. So as a practical matter, immigrants coming from Honduras or Guatemala, for example, if they came through Mexico and didn't apply for asylum in Mexico, they will not be eligible to seek asylum in the U.S. Now, in a joint statement, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security say they believe this will reduce what they call a major pull factor that drives immigration to the U.S. They say it's caused by asylum seekers failing to seek urgent protection in the first available country. There is an exception, somebody who can show that they were a victim of human trafficking, but they say they hope this rule will reduce what they call forum shopping by economic migrants. And they say another problem is the overwhelming...
What does that mean, forum shopping?
Somebody trying to seek the best, not seeking asylum in the first available place, but seeking asylum in some place that they think would be better or more accommodating to their asylum request. So they say that the number of cases in the system of people seeking asylum has tripled between 2013 and 2018. And they point out that only a very small number of people who apply for asylum are ultimately granted asylum because their cases are considered to be sufficiently persuasive. So they say there are just too many people who aren't eligible to seek asylum who are doing it, and they hope this will reduce that pull factor for migration into the U.S.
Elliot, what's your reaction to this? Asylum seekers may have spiked in the number seeking asylum, but we know that violence, for example, in the Northern Triangle has as well.
Yeah, so look, this is all an approach that started from the very earliest days of the administration to restrict even legal immigration. We're not even talking about illegal immigration here. And look, what's behind the administration's rule here is this exception to the asylum law that says that if you pass through, and this is the word is a safe third country, a country that's deemed safe. So for instance, if you were to leave North Korea, land in London, and then come to the United States, by any measure of the imagination, London is a safe third country, right? The problem is Mexico is not a safe country. We have travel advisories continuously with Mexico with some of the border towns. And so, for instance, up until just this past February, there was a travel advisory not to go to Ciudad Juarez to interact with even the police because of the level of corruption and violence within the police force. And so the idea that by passing through Mexico, you're passing through a safe country on the way to the United States, it's just bad policy and it's not true. What they're trying to do is restrict people from coming to the United States and applying for asylum. Again, no one's entitled to asylum here, but everyone's entitled to at least apply, but they're doing everything they can to provide a deterrent to even coming to the United States in the first place.
Will it work, Maria?
Well, sadly, I think it will. And unfortunately, what the president has done is layering on top of Trump has done is layering on top of other things that is exacerbating the issues in those home countries, making people have to come to the United States. And what I mean by that is that earlier this year, the president actually cut aid to Guatemala, to Honduras, to El Salvador, that explicitly tried to train tried to train law enforcement to be much safer, to actually uproot corruption, to actually address the issues of gangs. You can't have it both ways. You can't say we're going to make your country less safe, but at the same time, we're not going to abide by our own asylum laws. When, in fact, anybody the moment that someone steps foot on our country, they legally can ask for asylum. Are we processing these individuals fast enough? No. So let's actually get to the root of the problem. This president has also basically restrained the amount of immigration lawyers that can actually judges that can actually process these cases. Instead, he's penting out these individuals, the American taxpayers paying $775 a day for for-profit detentions and not actually going to the root of the cause problem. So let's actually figure out how do we fix the problem in these individuals' root country, but also let's make sure that these people are processed in a humane, decent way.
Mayor Levine, even if this gets blocked in the courts, What does the president's move do to voters who look at those images and say, we have a problem, all these people are trying to come here? Can the president make the argument, I'm doing something to lower the numbers, even if it makes absolutely no sense?
Stephanie, I think what you just said is 100% true. The bottom line is the president's playing to his base, and he's doing it very well. Houston, we have a problem. The country looks at this immigration issue as a big problem. The president is trying. It may not be legal. It may be the wrong thing to do, but he's trying to stem the problem that we have. We can continue with this, I call the end zone immigration policy. And what that basically means is if you carry the football across the border, you've scored. That's just not immigration policy. Yes, I agree with Maria. We need to fix the problem, deal with the root of the issue in Latin America. But right now, we must reform our immigration policy. I mean, I can tell you that the average American watching President Trump is saying, hey, at least the guy's trying to get something done. He knows he has a difficult task ahead of him, but America's looking at this. And I can tell you Democratic swing voters are looking at this and they're thinking, we need to fix the problem. And I can tell you that those of us on the progressive left over there that think somehow what we saw in those debates is going to be the answer of let everybody in and give them health care, that's a wonderful formula to lose in 2020. The Democrats need to get realistic, and I think the president, right or wrong, is at least trying to do something.
But Phil, doesn't that fall directly into the trap of the president's policy? Or your other option is open borders? It's not one or the other. Democrats on the other side aren't saying, let's just all walk in.
Well, that's not what I heard at that debate the other night. What I heard at the debate the other night is not only can you walk in with the football and you score and you're able to stay, but maybe you'll get health insurance to go along with it. That's what America heard. So the fact of the matter is the president is playing this beautifully, unfortunately, for us Democrats who need to get a little more realistic and understand that we need strong, enforceable immigration policy, and we need it now, and we better work together. Otherwise, we will have a President Trump in a second term.
Noah?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much right. The sad fact is that most of the public really doesn't like asylum seekers. They don't think refugees are a safe bet. They don't think this country should be a safe harbor necessarily for anybody who wants to come in. And it's not like you can just set foot on American soil and apply for asylum. You have to be at a port of entry. If you just simply cross the border, you're an illegal immigrant. We have a humanitarian crisis at the border. It is overwhelmed. We don't have the facilities to house these people. We don't have the judges to process these people. It has become a crisis of conditions that I think no one is comfortable with. And it is absolutely necessary to do something on pull factors as well as push factors. Maria's right. The cessation of aid to these countries in the triangle that are pushing people out is not going to help. But so, too, is it necessary to create legal conditions in which we can process these people effectively and not warehouse them like this. Because that's the sort of thing that Americans won't stand for. And it is a two-front conflict. You can't do one or the other. It must be both.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.